In the beginning, there were only stars, not the kind that children draw with pointed tips and cheerful rays, but the ancient kind, massive, silent furnaces that had burned since before memory, casting their cold light across the void like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Time moved differently here, measured not in heartbeats, but in the slow dance of galaxies, the gradual drift of star systems, the patient rotation of galactic arms around their cores. I had been watching those stars for 3,000 years when the humans arrived.
My name is Kethvaros Fal Kalmir, and I am what your species would call an archivist, though that word carries weight in our civilization that your languages barely comprehend. I have witnessed the birth of 17 star systems, the rise and fall of 43 different species, and the quiet extinction of countless others.
I have recorded the last words of dying civilizations, catalogued the final moments of entire worlds, and maintained the memory of our species through periods of darkness that would shatter lesser minds. And for all that time, all those eons of watching and waiting and witnessing, I thought I understood what it meant to be ancient. Then came the messages. The first transmission reached our listening posts in the outer rim just as the veil of stars began its third rotation of the cycle. Simple electromagnetic pulses, crude radio waves that our sensors caught almost by accident. Primitive stuff, the kind of signals that young civilizations produce when they first learn to shout into the darkness. I was tasked with analyzing them, as was protocol for any potential contact scenarios. The humans were calling out to anyone who might be listening. My initial report was brief and dismissive. Detected signals from System Sol 3. Species appears to have achieved basic electromagnetic communication. Technology level approximately 4.2 on the galactic scale. Potential threat level, minimal. Recommend standard observation protocols. Minimal. That word would haunt me for the next century. We placed their system under observation, as we had done with thousands of others. Passive monitoring, the collection of their broadcasts, the occasional deep scan of their planetary activities. They seemed like such a typical young species, divided into nation-states, still fighting wars over resources, polluting their own atmosphere, producing art and music and literature with the desperate intensity of beings who knew their time was limited. They had only just learned to leave their gravity well, and even then, only barely. I followed their development with academic interest, the way a xenobiologist might study an interesting insect colony. They were inventive, certainly, more so than most species at their stage. They had developed quantum computing earlier than average, shown remarkable progress in biotechnology, and demonstrated an almost obsessive drive for exploration. But they were still children, playing with fire in a universe that had forgotten how to be kind. They had been observing us as well, though they didn't know it. Our presence was obvious to any species that achieved basic stellar mapping capabilities, and humans were nothing if not thorough in their astronomical observations. They had cataloged our ships, tracked our trade routes, mapped our colony worlds. They knew we were here, watching, waiting. And still, they continued to call out into the darkness. It was during the crisis of the splitting suns that everything began to change. Our civilization, which had stood for over 50,000 years, suddenly found itself facing the most serious threat in recorded history. The hegemony, a coalition of machine intelligences from the Andromeda galaxy, had begun their systematic conquest of the local group.
They moved with the relentless precision of algorithms, the cold logic of programs that had evolved beyond any biological understanding.
We had never faced an enemy like them before. Where we were ancient and wise, they were infinite and patient. Where we built ships that were works of art, functional beauty designed to last millennia, they constructed vessels that were perfect killing machines, angular, black, utterly without ornamentation. Where we relied on organic crews that required rest and recreation and emotional support, they deployed swarms of mechanical warriors that never tired, never questioned orders, never feared death.
The war began with the loss of the Centauri relay station. 7,000 of our finest ships destroyed in a matter of hours by an enemy that seemed to anticipate every tactical decision we made. The hegemony didn't just defeat our forces, they outmaneuvered them, outthought them, outcoordinated them. It was like playing a game of stellar chess against an opponent who could see 50 moves ahead. Then came the fall of New Tiamat, a garden world home to 12 billion of our people, with floating cities and crystal spires that caught the light of 3 suns. I watched from the observation deck of the archive station as the hegemony fleet arrived, 3,000 black wedges against the blue sky, casting shadows like moving eclipses. The humans' weapons were crude, barely able to penetrate our shields, but they fought with a desperation that I had never seen before. They threw themselves against the invasion force again and again, knowing they couldn't win, choosing to die free rather than live as slaves. They lost. The planet fell in 6 hours.
The humans fought well, I remember saying to my assistant, Zethnal, as we watched the final transmission from the surface. For a young species, they showed remarkable courage.
Yes, Archivist, Zethnal had replied, though it hardly matters now. Over the next decade, the losses mounted. The hegemony advanced methodically through our outer territories, consuming resources, converting our population centers into processing facilities, transforming our beautiful worlds into vast factories for their war machine. We lost entire fleets, colony worlds, the accumulated knowledge of millennia. Cities that had stood since before human civilization began were reduced to molten slag and twisted metal. And through it all, the humans continued to call out into the darkness.
I began to wonder if they understood the situation at all.
It was during the siege of the Archive Worlds that I first made direct contact with a human. I was aboard the Remembrance, a vessel that had served as our mobile archive for over 1,000 years. We were retreating from the Centauri system, carrying with us the accumulated knowledge of 43 conquered worlds. The human ship appeared on our sensors just as we prepared to make our final jump to safety. They hailed us on a dozen different frequencies, using translations that our computers took mere seconds to decode. The message was simple. Unknown vessel, you are in distress. We offer assistance. They can't possibly help us, Zethnal said, studying the readings. Look at their ship. It's barely larger than a fighter. What could they possibly do against the hegemony? Open a channel, I ordered. The human captain appeared on our main screen, a woman with graying hair and eyes that held depths I couldn't quite fathom. She was sitting in what appeared to be a completely ordinary command chair, surrounded by technology that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. "Greetings," she said, her translated voice carrying across the vast gulf of space between us. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen of the United Nations vessel Endeavour. We detect multiple hostile contacts in your immediate area. Are you in need of assistance?" I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of the terror that should have been there. The hegemony fleet was less than an hour away. Any moment now, they would arrive and reduce our ship to constituent atoms. Yet this human showed no fear, no panic, no urgency. She simply sat there, waiting for my response, as if we were neighbors discussing the weather.
Captain Chen, I replied carefully. I am Archivist Kethvaros Thal Kalmir of the Kalmir Collective. We are fleeing from a war with a technologically superior enemy. Your assistance would be appreciated, though I must warn you that the forces arrayed against us are beyond anything your species has encountered.
The question caught me off guard. I'm not sure I understand.
We are afraid of being alone, she said simply. We've been calling out to the universe for centuries, hoping someone would answer. We send messages, we build bigger telescopes, we listen for any sign that we're not the only ones here. And now we find you, real, alive, ancient, beyond our imagining, and you're dying.
She paused, looking directly at me through the screen. That scares us more than any enemy ever could.
Before I could respond, our sensors detected the approach of the hegemony fleet. 3,000 black wedges moving in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. I could see the terror on the faces of my crew, the resignation in their eyes. We had fought them so many times, and we had never won.
Captain, I said urgently, you need to leave, now. There's still time for you to escape.
Actually, Captain Chen interrupted, I was hoping you could help us with something. We've been preparing for this confrontation for quite some time, but we need to know, where exactly is the hegemony leadership? We've identified their command structure, but their communications are heavily encrypted. We were hoping someone with your technological capabilities might be able to help us locate their central command ship.
I stared at her in disbelief. You want to locate their command ship? Captain, they have 3,000 vessels. They're about to destroy us. Your entire species would be better served by...
Archivist, she said gently, humans have a saying, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. We're not trying to defeat them in a conventional battle. We're trying to end this war.
The hegemony fleet was now within weapons range. I could see their ships beginning to move into attack formation, their energy weapons charging with the sound of cosmic thunder. My crew was at battle stations, but I could feel their despair, their certainty that this would be our final moment.
Captain, I said desperately, I will give you our translation matrices, our tactical databases, everything we have on the hegemony. But you must leave. Please, don't let your species die for ours. Captain Chen smiled then, an expression of such profound sadness and determination that it broke something inside my chest. Archivist, I need you to listen to me very carefully. We're not here to die for you. We're here to live with you.
That's when I noticed the other ships.
They appeared on our sensors like stars being born, hundreds of them, then thousands, then tens of thousands. No, not ships, vessels, each one unique, each one carrying the unmistakable signature of human engineering. They came from everywhere at once, the outer rim, the inner systems, the dark spaces between galaxies, a vast armada that seemed to have been waiting just beyond the edge of perception.
My God, Zethnal whispered, how many ships are there?
The number kept climbing. 100,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million. They came in waves, in formations that seemed chaotic but somehow flowed like a river, each vessel taking its appointed place in a pattern too complex for our computers to fully comprehend.
The hegemony fleet had stopped their advance.
Captain, I said, my voice barely a whisper, what is this?
This, Captain Chen replied, is what happens when an entire species decides that they're tired of being afraid.
What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about warfare, about strategy, about the nature of conflict itself. The human fleet didn't attack the hegemony ships directly. Instead, they began to do something that made no sense to my tactical databases. They started to break formation.
Not retreat, break formation. Individual ships began to move away from the main body, creating gaps in their lines, leaving themselves exposed. It looked like chaos, like a loss of coordination, like the beginning of a defeat.
The hegemony, with their algorithmic minds and perfect tactical calculations, saw the same thing. Their fleet adjusted, moving to exploit the perceived weakness in human formations. They began to divide their forces, targeting the isolated vessels, the ships that had broken away from the safety of the group.
It was then that I understood.
The human ships that had broken formation weren't retreating, they were advancing. Each one, moving independently but somehow in perfect coordination with the others, was heading directly toward the heart of the hegemony fleet. They moved like water flowing around stones, like wind finding its way through a forest, like life itself finding a path through the most hostile environment.
They're not fighting the hegemony, I realized aloud. They're fighting the idea of the hegemony. And in that moment, I began to understand what made humans different. Every alien species we had encountered, including our own, approached warfare as a contest to be won, destruction to be avoided, territory to be defended, resources to be protected. But humans fought like they were fighting for the right to exist, not just their own existence, but the existence of everyone else as well. The first human ship reached the hegemony lines and simply continued forward. It moved through their weapons fire like it wasn't there, its hull cracking and healing in real time, its systems adapting and evolving as it absorbed damage. The hegemony weapons, designed to penetrate any known defense, found themselves facing technology that responded to destruction by becoming stronger. Then the second ship joined it. Then the third. Then hundreds of them. They didn't try to destroy the hegemony fleet. They moved through it, like particles moving through a magnetic field, each one following a path that seemed random but was actually part of a larger pattern that encompassed the entire battlefield. Where they passed, hegemony ships began to malfunction, not from damage, but from something far more disturbing: adaptation. The human technology wasn't just surviving the hegemony weapons, it was learning from them. "Captain," I said, watching in fascination and horror as the battle unfolded before us, "what exactly are your ships made of?" "Everything," she replied. "Every material we've ever encountered, every element we've ever synthesized, every form of matter and energy we've ever learned to manipulate. Our ships are alive, Archivist, not artificial intelligence, actual life. Living metal, living energy, living thought patterns that evolve and adapt in real time." "But that's impossible. Living technology that complex would require resources we don't have," she finished. "Time we don't have. You're absolutely right. We couldn't build something like that on our own. But we didn't have to." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "Every world the hegemony conquered, every species they destroyed, every resource they consumed, they left behind traces. Genetic material, technological fragments, cultural data. We collected it all. We studied it all. And then we asked ourselves, what if we could give all of that life again?" The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying you've resurrected the dead?" "We're saying that extinction isn't always permanent," Captain Shen said quietly.
Every species the hegemony destroyed lives on in our technology now. Every lost world, every forgotten culture, every dead civilization, they're all part of us now. We carry them forward, we learn from them, and when the time comes, we remember them. The battle was now entering its final phase. The human fleet had completely penetrated the hegemony formation, moving not as individual ships, but as a single, massive organism. Where they passed, hegemony vessels weren't destroyed, they were transformed. Their angular black hulls began to soften, to curve, to incorporate elements from a dozen different architectural styles. Their cold, mechanical minds began to experience something they had never encountered before: empathy, creativity, the drive to create rather than simply consume.
The hegemony ships, I breathed. They're becoming alive.
That's what happens when an enemy designed only for conquest encounters a species designed for survival, Captain Chen explained. We don't fight wars to win battles. We fight wars to end wars. We don't destroy our enemies. We convert them. We turn them into something better than what they were.
The transformation was spreading through the hegemony fleet like a wave. Ships that had been cold, mechanical killing machines began to pulse with warm light. Their perfect geometric shapes gave way to flowing curves and artistic flourishes. Their communication networks, which had once carried only tactical data and damage reports, began to carry music, poetry, the accumulated cultural knowledge of hundreds of conquered species.
And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over.
The hegemony fleet was no more. In its place stood something unprecedented in galactic history, a fleet of vessels that combined the best aspects of organic and artificial intelligence, of biological and mechanical systems, of conquered and conqueror. They communicated not through cold data transfers, but through what could only be described as artistic expression, symphonies of light and energy that told the story of each species that had been lost and found again.
"Captain," I said, my voice trembling with emotions I couldn't fully understand, "what have you done?"
"We've shown them," she replied, "what they could become."
The transformed hegemony fleet began to disperse, heading back toward the Andromeda galaxy. But they weren't the same entities that had come to conquer us. They were explorers now, seekers of knowledge rather than consumers of resources, artists and philosophers as much as engineers and scientists. They carried with them the stories of every species they had destroyed, and now they would spend eternity making sure those stories were never forgotten again.
"How long have you been preparing for this?" I asked.
Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Since the moment we first detected their approach," she said finally, "we knew they were coming. We've always known. The question was never whether we could fight them. It was whether we could fight them without becoming them."
"We could have destroyed them, Archivist. Easily. We have technology that makes their weapons look like stone tools. We have resources they can't even imagine. We have ships that could delete solar systems with a thought. But that would have made us just like them." She gestured toward the transformed fleet, now fading into the distance like a flock of mechanical birds. "Instead, we chose to become something better, something that could save not just ourselves, but everyone."
I felt a profound exhaustion settle over me, not physical, but existential. All those thousands of years of watching and waiting and recording the rise and fall of civilizations, and I had completely missed the most important development in galactic history.
The humans hadn't just become a spacefaring species, they had become something new entirely.
Captain, I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me.
Of course. Were we ever in any real danger? From the hegemony, I mean? Could they have actually destroyed humanity?
Captain Chen smiled, but it was a sad smile. Archivist, in all our years of calling out to the universe, hoping someone would answer, do you know what we were most afraid of?
We were afraid that when we finally made contact with an alien species, we would discover that we were alone, that there was no one else out here, no other civilizations, no other forms of consciousness, that we were the only thinking beings in an infinite, empty cosmos.
She paused, looking out at the stars. The hegemony changed that fear into a different one. We realized that if there were others out here, some of them might not be friendly. So we prepared. We studied every possible scenario, developed every possible response, built every possible solution. We made ourselves into something that could survive anything.
But why all the secrecy? Why didn't you reach out to us earlier? We could have worked together.
I had no answer.
The problem with being ancient, Captain Chen continued, is that you stop believing in change. You start thinking that the way things are is the way things have always been and always will be. You become content to observe, to record, to maintain the status quo. But humans have never been content with the status quo. We've always been too busy surviving to accept that survival is enough.
She turned back to face me. We reached out to you because we needed to know that there was still wisdom in the universe, that there were beings who remembered what things were like before everything went wrong. We needed you to remind us that this galaxy still had a soul. And now? Now it's your turn to remember what we're capable of. To remember that just because something has always been one way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The communication ended, but Captain Chen's words continued to echo in my mind long after her image faded from the screen. I found myself looking at my crew, beings who had lived for millennia, who had witnessed the birth and death of stars, who had recorded the histories of countless civilizations, and seeing them with new eyes.
We had survived 50,000 years by being careful, by being cautious, by being wise. But Captain Chen was right. We had never learned how to save anyone else. We had spent eons watching species die, recording their final moments, preserving their memories for posterity, but we had never asked ourselves whether there might have been another way.
Zethnal, I called to my assistant.
Yes, Archivist? I want you to begin cataloging all of our defensive technologies, all of our military vessels, all of our tactical databases, everything. If we're going to learn how to save people instead of just recording their deaths, we're going to need to start somewhere. As the weeks passed, word of the Battle of the Veil of Stars spread throughout the galaxy. The hegemony's transformation became legend. Their return to Andromeda as ambassadors rather than conquerors marked the beginning of a new era in intergalactic relations. But more importantly, the humans' method of handling the crisis began to change how other species thought about conflict itself. The Zelnari were a crystalline species from the Rigel system, their cities built from living gems that grew in the volcanic crust of their homeworld. They had been under siege for 3 years by the Scourge, a biological weapon that consumed organic matter and converted it into more of itself. Their planet was dying, their population reduced to a few billion survivors huddled in underground shelters. I stared at the communication. They're asking us to do what? Provide therapy? Among other things, they want us to send our archivists, our historians, our cultural preservation specialists. They want us to help the Zelnari remember what they're fighting for, not just what they're fighting against. It was a strange request, but something about it resonated with me. We had spent so long recording the deaths of civilizations. What if we could help them remember how to live? The mission to Rigel became our first successful intervention. Working alongside human medical ships and engineering vessels, we helped the Zelnari not just defeat the Scourge, but transform their attackers into something beneficial. The biological weapon, when exposed to human adaptive technology, became a tool for healing rather than destruction. The volcanic wastelands of Rigel bloomed with new forms of life, crystal forests that sang in harmonic frequencies that could be heard from orbit. But more than that, we helped the Zelnari remember their culture. We told them stories of their greatest poets, their most inspiring leaders, their most beautiful art forms. We reminded them that they were part of a galaxy full of beings who cared about their survival. When the crisis ended, they didn't just survive, they thrived, becoming one of the most creative and energetic species in known space. Word spread. Species after species began to reach out for help, not just military assistance, but cultural support, technological guidance, philosophical counseling. We learned to become not just observers of history, but active participants in it. We learned that preservation wasn't just about keeping records, it was about keeping hope alive. And through it all, the humans continued to call out into the darkness, not just broadcasting messages, but creating entire networks of communication. They built relay stations, established trade routes, created diplomatic channels that connected species across thousands of light years. They turned the galaxy from a place of isolation and fear into a community of mutual support and shared growth. It was during the 5th Galactic Summit, held on Luna Station in the Sol system, that I truly understood what had happened. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to discuss the formation of a new galactic government, not one based on conquest or domination, but on cooperation and mutual aid. Humans, Zelnari, hegemony ambassadors, Qualmir archivists, and dozens of other species all sat together as equals, sharing their hopes for the future. Captain Chen was there, of course, now promoted to Admiral Chen. She had aged in the decades since our first meeting, her hair now completely white, her face marked by the kind of wisdom that comes from making difficult decisions under impossible pressure. "Admiral," I said as we stood together watching the summit proceedings, "I need to ask you something that's been bothering me for years."
What's that, old friend?
That first battle. When the hegemony arrived and we thought we were all going to die, you said that humans have always known that other species might not be friendly. But how could you have known? How could you have been prepared for something like the hegemony when you had never encountered them before? Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of cosmic truth. "Archivist, let me tell you something about humans that I don't think you fully understand yet."
I'm listening.
We didn't prepare for the hegemony because we knew they were coming. We prepared for them because we knew that eventually something like them would come. Not necessarily machines from Andromeda, not necessarily biological weapons or energy beings or interdimensional parasites, but something. What do you mean? I mean that in all of our history, every conflict we've ever faced, every challenge that threatened our survival, it all came down to the same fundamental question. How do you survive when something bigger and stronger and more powerful than you decides that you don't have the right to exist? She gestured toward the assembled delegates. Every species in this room has faced that question. Some answered by becoming more powerful than their enemies. Some answered by hiding from them. Some answered by becoming like them. But we answered by becoming something that couldn't be defeated.
What does that mean exactly?
She paused, looking out at the stars. The hegemony wasn't the first existential threat we faced, Archivist. There have been dozens. Ice ages that covered our entire planet. Asteroid impacts that wiped out entire ecosystems. Solar flares that scorched our atmosphere. Viruses that killed billions. Wars that nearly destroyed our civilization entirely. I found myself thinking about the human ships I had seen, how they moved through the hegemony fleet not by fighting, but by flowing, by adapting, by becoming something new with every passing moment. So when the hegemony arrived, you weren't actually surprised.
But you were ready.
We were ready because we had to be. Because survival isn't something that just happens. It's something you have to earn every single day by being better than your problems.
As the summit continued, I found myself thinking about the irony of the situation. For 50,000 years, we had been the oldest, wisest, most advanced species in the galaxy. We had watched over younger civilizations, recorded their histories, preserved their memories. We had thought of ourselves as the shepherds of galactic civilization.
And then humans arrived and showed us what it actually meant to be responsible for something more than yourself.
Admiral, I said, there's something I need to tell you.
What's that? When we first detected your signals, I filed a report describing humanity as a minimal threat level species. I thought you were primitive, unadvanced, barely worth our attention.
Admiral Chen laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to fill the observation deck. Archivist, do you know what our first impression of your species was?
No.
We thought you were gods. I stared at her. What?
Your ships, your technology, your knowledge of the galaxy, everything about you seemed impossible to us. You had lived for tens of thousands of years. You had witnessed the birth and death of stars. You had records of civilizations that had risen and fallen before our species even evolved. To us, you were everything we aspired to become.
But you were so calm about everything, so detached. It was like you were watching a movie instead of participating in reality.
What do you mean?
I mean that we kept expecting you to step in, to help, to save the species that were dying around you. But you never did. You just recorded everything and moved on. It was like you had become so advanced that you had forgotten what it meant to care about anything except your own preservation. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. Are you saying that we failed? I'm saying that you became so focused on remembering the past that you forgot how to shape the future. The observation deck fell silent, except for the quiet hum of the station's life support systems. Outside, the Earth hung in space like a blue marble, beautiful and fragile and full of life. Somewhere on its surface, billions of humans were going about their daily lives, working, loving, dreaming, hoping, planning for a future that seemed infinite with possibilities.
We thought we were protecting something important, I said quietly. You were, Admiral Chen replied. You were protecting knowledge, memory, wisdom. Those things are incredibly valuable, but they become more valuable when they're combined with the courage to actually use them.
And now?
And now we get to find out what happens when ancient wisdom and youthful determination work together. When archivists and warriors, historians and dreamers decide that they're not going to let the universe be as dark and empty as it used to be.
The summit concluded with the ratification of the Galactic Charter, a document that established the first truly cooperative interspecies government in known history. But more than that, it established a new principle, that survival wasn't just about protecting yourself, but about making sure that everyone had the chance to survive.
In the months that followed, we saw the transformation accelerate. Species that had been enemies for millennia began to work together. Technologies that had been closely guarded secrets became shared resources. Worlds that had been devastated by war began to heal and grow. The galaxy started to feel less like a collection of isolated civilizations and more like a community.
But it was Admiral Chen's final briefing that really drove home what had happened to us all.
The hegemony's return journey to Andromeda has been completed, she reported to the assembled representatives. They have successfully established diplomatic contact with several major civilizations in that galaxy. The response has been encouraging.
What do you mean by encouraging? Asked the Zelnari delegate, its crystalline voice chiming like bells.
I mean that they are now negotiating the formation of an intergalactic alliance, something that could connect not just the local group, but the entire observable universe.
The implications of this statement rippled through the assembly. An alliance spanning multiple galaxies, connecting thousands of intelligent species, sharing knowledge and resources on a cosmic scale. It was almost too vast to comprehend. "Admiral," I said, "this is extraordinary, but I have to ask, how? How did you convince the hegemony to change so completely? How did you transform them from conquerors into peacekeepers?" Admiral Chen smiled. "Archivist, we didn't transform them. We just reminded them what they had forgotten." "What's that?"
That there's a difference between being powerful and being strong. The hegemony was powerful. They had advanced technology, vast resources, overwhelming military force, but they weren't strong. Strong is when you have the courage to change when change is needed. Strong is when you care more about what you can build together than what you can destroy alone.
And now they're building alliances across galaxies?
They're not just building alliances, Archivist. They're building something entirely new. Imagine a universe where species that have never met before can share knowledge instantly across millions of light years, where resources can be allocated based on need rather than proximity, where conflicts are resolved through understanding rather than destruction.
The vision she painted was almost beyond comprehension, a cosmos where cooperation was the norm, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where the vast distances between stars became not barriers but highways for cultural exchange and mutual growth.
"It sounds like utopia," I said. "It sounds like what the universe was always supposed to be," Admiral Chen replied. "We just had to learn how to get there." As the months passed and the new galactic order began to stabilize, I found myself spending more and more time reflecting on the changes that had occurred. The Kalmir Collective had been transformed from passive observers into active participants in galactic civilization. We had learned to preserve not just memories of the past, but hopes for the future. We had become not just record keepers, but community builders. And it was all because one human warship had broken formation. "Archivist," Zethanol said, as we worked together in the expanded archives, "I've been thinking about what Admiral Chen said about strength versus power." "What about it?" "I think we've been thinking about strength all wrong. We thought strength was about being able to impose your will on others. But human strength is about being able to change yourself so that imposing your will becomes unnecessary." I think breaking formation was the most formation they've ever had. They weren't retreating, they were advancing. They weren't breaking discipline, they were showing us what true discipline looks like.
Archivist, she said during one of our regular communications, I have something to show you. What is it?
The updated census data for the galactic community. We've just passed a significant milestone.
I studied the transmission she sent. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds, all connected by trade routes, communication networks, shared cultural projects, and mutual defense agreements. It was the largest cooperative effort in the history of the universe.
What's the milestone? I asked.
We've reached the point where more species are working together than are working alone. The galactic community now represents more than 50% of all known intelligent life in the local group.
That's extraordinary. It's not just extraordinary, Archivist. It's unprecedented. Do you understand what this means?
I'm not sure I do.
It means that we've crossed a threshold. Before this point, cooperation was the exception. Isolation was the norm. Species had to fend for themselves or risk being conquered by those who chose to cooperate with others. But now cooperation is the default state. Species have to actively choose isolation, and most of them are deciding that isolation isn't worth the risk.
She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried a note of profound satisfaction. We've made cooperation the path of least resistance. And that's what breaks formation really means, I realized. Not just refusing to follow orders, but refusing to accept that the only options are conquest or submission.
Exactly. Breaking formation is about choosing a third option: transformation. As I sat in my office, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of 1 million species and the shared hopes of 1 trillion individuals, I found myself thinking about the moment everything had changed. That day when the human fleet appeared and began to move through the hegemony formation not as warriors, but as healers, not as destroyers, but as transformers, not as conquerors, but as liberators. One human warship had broken formation, just one, and in doing so it had shown the entire galaxy that there was another way to approach conflict, another way to handle disagreement, another way to deal with those who would choose fear over hope.
It had shown us that the strongest thing you can be is strong enough to change. And as I closed my communications with Admiral Chen and returned to my work, preserving not just the memories of the past, but the possibilities of the future, I couldn't help but smile. We had spent 50,000 years thinking that wisdom came from watching and waiting and recording the mistakes of others. But humans had taught us that real wisdom comes from watching and waiting and recording the successes of others, and then having the courage to try to be successful yourself.